The day my grandson William was baptized, my daughter-in-law Victoria tossed the homemade bread I'd baked for the celebration straight into the garbage. She didn't realize I was standing in the doorway, watching as she held it away from her body, like something contaminated. "I can't serve this," she whispered to my son Richard. "It was made by someone who cleans houses for a living." I didn't say a word. I just swallowed the pain and spent the entire reception serving food to guests, smiling as if my heart wasn't shattering inside my chest. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Eleanor Sullivan, and at 67 years old, I never expected to feel so invisible in my own family. I've spent a lifetime building something meaningful, raising my son Richard with my own 2 hands after my husband passed away when Richard was just 12, cleaning other people's homes to put food on our table, and saving every penny to help Richard through college. Now, in what should be my golden years, I found myself erased by a woman who saw my lifetime of hard work as something shameful. That Sunday morning had started with such promise. The spring air carried the scent of magnolias as I carefully placed my freshly baked sourdough bread, a recipe passed down 3 generations in my family, into a basket lined with a hand-embroidered cloth. The baptism was scheduled for 11. At St. Matthew's Episcopal Church, the same church where Richard had been baptized 32 years earlier. I'd been looking forward to this day for months, ever since little William had been born. I arrived at the church early, wanting to help with any last-minute preparations. Victoria's parents, the Crawfords, were already there, directing the florist, where to place elaborate arrangements of white roses and baby's breath. Catherine Crawford, dressed in a pale blue designer suit that probably cost more than 3 months of my Social Security checks, barely acknowledged me with a nod before continuing her conversation with the priest. "Eleanor," Richard called, coming down the church steps with baby William in his arms. My heart swelled at the sight of them. My son, and my first grandchild. "You're early. Thought I might help?" I said, reaching for William. He had his father's eyes, deep brown with flecks of gold, but Victoria's straight nose and Cupid's bow mouth. "Where's Victoria?" Getting dressed in the church office. Her mother brought a makeup artist. Richard shifted uncomfortably. "Listen, Mom, Victoria's a bit stressed about everything being perfect today. Her parents have invited some important people from their social circle." I nodded, understanding the unspoken message. "Don't embarrass them. Don't remind anyone that Richard came from humble beginnings." "I brought the bread for the reception," I said, holding up my basket. "My grandmother's recipe." Something flickered across Richard's face. Was it embarrassment? "That's nice, Mom. I'll take it to the reception hall." I handed over the basket, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in my stomach. "I made sure the crust was extra crusty, just how you like it." "Thanks," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "I should get back to Victoria. You know how she gets." I watched him walk away, William's tiny hand wrapped around his father's finger. The distance between us seemed to stretch with each step Richard took, much farther than the physical space of the church courtyard. The baptism ceremony was beautiful. William, dressed in the same christening gown Richard had worn, barely fussed as the priest poured holy water over his forehead. Victoria, stunning in a cream-colored dress that highlighted her slender figure, beamed with pride. The Crawfords filmed everything on an expensive camera, while I sat in the 3rd row, snapping pictures with my outdated smartphone. No one had saved me a seat in the front row with the family. When the ceremony ended, I followed the procession to the reception hall attached to the church. Tables had been set with fine linen cloths and crystal glasses that caught the light from overhead chandeliers. A catering team busied themselves in the kitchen area, setting out trays of tiny sandwiches and pastries. I placed my purse down on a chair and headed toward the kitchen, thinking I could help arrange the food. That's when I saw it. Through the kitchen doorway, I watched as Victoria took my bread basket, lifted the cloth, and recoiled slightly. "What's this?" she asked Richard. "Mom's bread," he replied, his voice low. "She baked it for today." Victoria's perfectly plucked. Eyebrows drew together. "We can't serve this, Richard. We have professional catering." "It's just bread, Vic. It's not just bread. Look at it. It's homemade." "What will people think?" "My parents' friends are here. The Andersons are here and they're on the hospital board." Richard sighed. "What do you want me to do?" Victoria glanced around, then decisively dropped my bread, basket and all, into the large garbage can beside the prep table. "I can't serve this," she whispered. "It was made by someone who cleans houses for a living." The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd been cleaning houses for nearly 40 years, starting when Richard's father died unexpectedly of a heart attack. It had put food on our table, kept a roof over our heads, paid for Richard's braces and his college application fees. I'd scrubbed floors and toilets so Richard would never have to, and now his wife was ashamed of me. Richard didn't defend me. He just stood there, saying nothing, as Victoria brushed off her hands as if touching my bread had dirtied them. "The caterers brought artisanal bread from that French bakery downtown," she said more gently now. "It'll be much better." I should have turned around then, should have grabbed my purse and walked out the door. But William, my precious grandson, was celebrating his baptism. So I swallowed my pride, pasted on a smile, and walked into the kitchen, as if I hadn't witnessed their conversation. "Can I help with anything?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Victoria startled. "Eleanor, I didn't see you there." "I thought I could help serve," I said, reaching for an apron hanging on a hook. I'd worn aprons all my life, first in my own kitchen, then in the homes I cleaned. They were as familiar to me as my own skin. Victoria exchanged a glance with Richard. "That's not necessary. The caterers—" "I don't mind," I interrupted, tying the apron around my waist. "I've been serving food at church functions since before Richard was born." Victoria looked like she wanted to object, but at that moment, her mother called her from the reception hall. "Victoria, the Hendersons are asking about your honeymoon home in Cape Cod." With a last uncertain look at me, Victoria hurried away, leaving Richard and me alone in the kitchen. "Mom," he began, clearly uncomfortable. I busied myself arranging cucumber sandwiches on a silver tray. "It's a beautiful ceremony, Richard. William did so well." "Mom, about the bread." "Don't worry about it," I said, still not looking at him. "I understand." But I didn't understand. Not really. When had my son become someone who would let his wife throw away something I'd made with love? When had he started being embarrassed by me? Richard stood awkwardly for a moment, then muttered something about checking on the guests and left me alone in the kitchen. I continued arranging food on trays, fighting back tears that threatened to spill over. This wasn't the time or place for them. Throughout the reception, I moved among the guests with trays of food and drinks. Most didn't even look at me, assuming I was part of the catering staff. Those who did recognize me seemed surprised. "Eleanor, why are you serving?" asked Margaret Jenkins, an old friend from church. "You should be sitting with the family." I forced a smile. "I like keeping busy." Catherine Crawford cornered me near the dessert table, her voice lowered though her smile remained fixed for anyone watching. "Eleanor, there's no need for you to work today. It makes Victoria uncomfortable, like we couldn't afford proper help." I met her gaze steadily. "I've never been one to sit idle, Catherine." "Yes. Well, in our family, grandmothers don't serve at their grandchildren's events," she said with a tight smile. "They enjoy them." The implication was clear. In their family, not in mine, because their family had money, position, status. They'd never had to work with their hands, never known what it was to choose between paying the electric bill or buying new shoes for a growing child. As the reception wound down, I found myself in the kitchen again, washing dishes alongside the catering. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Staff. The head caterer, a woman about my age with silver-streaked dark hair, gave me a curious look. "You're the baby's grandmother, aren't you?" she asked, handing me a towel to dry a crystal platter. I nodded. "Eleanor Sullivan." "Maria Gonzalez." She replied. "My team and I can handle this. You should be out there with your family." I glanced through the doorway to where Victoria was showing off William to a group of well-dressed women. Richard stood beside her, his hand resting on the small of her back, looking every inch the proud father and successful husband. They didn't need me out there. They looked complete without me. "I'm fine here," I said, turning back to the sink. Maria studied me for a moment, then nodded in understanding. "I've been catering for 30 years, she said, as she carefully wrapped leftover food. "Started as a housekeeper when I came to this country. Some people, they look right through you when you work with your hands." I felt a lump form in my throat. Yes. We worked in companionable silence for a while. After most of the dishes were done, Maria handed me a small package wrapped in foil. "Pastelitos," she explained. "Sweet pastries from my country, for you to take home." The simple kindness nearly undid me. "Thank you," I managed, tucking the package into my apron pocket. By the time I finished in the kitchen, most of the guests had left. Victoria and Richard were saying goodbye to her parents near the entrance. William, overtired from all the excitement, was fussing in Victoria's arms. "I think he needs a nap," I said, approaching them. "Would you like me to take him for a bit?" Victoria instinctively pulled William closer. "No, thank you. I've got him." William's cries grew louder. Victoria bounced him gently, looking increasingly flustered. "Victoria," Catherine said, "let Eleanor take him for a moment while we finish discussing the dinner plans." With obvious reluctance, Victoria handed William to me. The moment he settled into my arms, his cries softened. I hummed a lullaby I used to sing to Richard, swaying gently from side to side. Within minutes, William's eyes grew heavy, and he drifted off to sleep. Victoria watched, a mixture of relief and something like resentment crossing her face. "You got him to sleep," she said, her tone suggesting I'd performed some trick she couldn't quite figure out. "Years of practice," I replied softly, gazing down at William's peaceful face. In that moment, holding my grandson, none of the day's hurt seemed to matter quite as much. Richard approached, placing his hand on Victoria's shoulder. "We should get going. William needs to be in his crib." I reluctantly handed the sleeping baby back to Victoria, who immediately adjusted her hold, as if correcting my technique. "I can come over tomorrow," I offered. "Help with anything you need." Victoria and Richard exchanged a look. "Actually," Richard said, "Victoria's mother is staying with us for the next few days to help out." Another invisible blow. Of course Catherine was staying with them. Catherine, with her designer clothes and perfect manners, who had never cleaned anyone's house but her own. "I understand," I said, though the familiar phrase was beginning to taste bitter on my tongue. "Maybe next week, then." Richard nodded vaguely. "We'll call you." I watched them leave, Victoria's parents following closely behind. The four of them and baby William, a perfect family portrait that had no place for me. The church hall emptied quickly after that. I helped Maria and her team finish clearing up, despite her protests, then collected my purse and the empty bread basket Victoria had retrieved from the trash when she thought I wasn't looking. The spring day had turned cooler as evening approached. I pulled my cardigan tighter around me as I walked to the bus stop. My car had broken down the previous month, and I hadn't yet saved enough for the repairs. Sitting on the bench at the bus stop, I finally allowed the tears to come. They slid down my cheeks silently, witnesses to a pain I couldn't quite name. It wasn't just about the bread, or being mistaken for the help, or even Victoria's obvious disdain for my profession. It was the growing realization that in my son's new life, I was becoming an inconvenience, a reminder of humble beginnings he'd rather forget. As the bus rumbled toward my stop, I wiped away my tears and straightened my shoulders. I was Eleanor Sullivan. I had survived losing my husband at 40. I had raised a son alone, working 2 or sometimes 3 jobs to give him opportunities I never had. I had built a life with my own 2 hands, and no one, not even Victoria with her perfect clothes and contempt for honest work, could take that away from me. But something had shifted that day, something fundamental in how I saw myself in relation to my son and his new family. I had always believed that love was enough, that the bonds of family transcended social class and background. Now, I wasn't so sure. The bus doors opened with a hydraulic hiss. I climbed aboard, dropped my fare into the box, and found a seat near the back. As the bus pulled away from the curb, I opened my purse and took out Maria's gift of pastelitos. The pastry was still warm, the sweet filling a comfort as I rode home alone to my empty apartment. I didn't know then that this day was just the beginning, that things would get much worse before they got better. I didn't know that in less than a month, I would make a decision that would shock my son and his wife to their core. I only knew that something had to change, because I couldn't keep swallowing my pain and pretending it didn't exist. I couldn't keep being invisible. The final straw came 3 weeks after William's baptism. I'd been invited to Sunday dinner at Richard and Victoria's 3-story brownstone, a peace offering, Richard had called it when he phoned. I spent all morning preparing a raspberry cheesecake, Victoria's favorite dessert according to Richard, though I suspected he was the one who truly loved it. I'd even splurged on fresh organic raspberries, despite their outrageous price at the local market. Spring rain pattered against my kitchen window as I carefully packed the cheesecake into a carrier. My apartment, a modest 1-bedroom on the unfashionable side of town, felt especially small that day, crowded with memories and the weight of expectations. As I slipped on my good raincoat, the one I reserved for church and special occasions, I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at me seemed older somehow, the lines around her eyes deeper, her silver hair dulled in the weak light. "You are not invisible," I told my reflection firmly. "You are Eleanor Sullivan. You matter." The bus ride to Richard and Victoria's neighborhood took nearly an hour, with 2 transfers. I held the cheesecake carrier carefully on my lap, protecting it from the jostling of the Sunday afternoon crowd. By the time I arrived at their block, lined with restored historic homes and carefully tended front gardens, the rain had stopped, leaving behind a fresh, clean scent in the air. Richard answered the door, William cradled in one arm. "Mom," he said, leaning down to kiss my cheek. "You made it." "Of course I did," I replied, stepping inside. Their entryway gleamed with polished hardwood and tasteful artwork. "I brought dessert, raspberry cheesecake." A flicker of concern crossed Richard's face. "Oh, Victoria's mother brought a cake from Bellini's, the fancy bakery downtown." I forced a smile. "Well, now you have 2. Never too much dessert, right?" He didn't answer, instead turning toward the sound of voices from the dining room. "Everyone's already here," he said. "Victoria's parents came early to help set up." I followed Richard through the house, noting the fresh flowers on every surface, the expensive furniture that had replaced the modest pieces Richard and Victoria had started with. Everything felt curated, as if their home was a museum display rather than a place where real people lived. Victoria sat at the head of the dining table, Catherine beside her, their heads bent together over what appeared to be a photo album. Victoria's father, James Crawford, stood by the bay window, drink in hand, deep in conversation with a man I didn't recognize. "Eleanor," Catherine said, looking up. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "How nice of you to join us." Victoria rose, smoothing her silk blouse. Eleanor, I hope the trip wasn't too difficult. She glanced at the cheesecake carrier in my hands. Oh, you didn't have to bring anything. It's raspberry cheesecake, I said, setting it on the sideboard where several dishes were already arranged. Richard mentioned you like it. That's thoughtful, Victoria replied, though her tone suggested otherwise. Mother brought a chocolate mousse cake from Bellini's. It's William's 3-week celebration, so we wanted something special. The implication stung. My homemade cheesecake wasn't special enough for the occasion. I swallowed my hurt and turned to the stranger by the window. I don't believe we've met. Richard stepped forward quickly. Mom, this is Dr. Andrew Peterson. He's the head of pediatric medicine at Memorial Hospital. Andrew, my mother, Eleanor Sullivan. Dr. Peterson extended his hand. Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Sullivan. It's Ms. Sullivan, actually, I corrected, gently. I've been widowed for many years. My apologies, he said, his eyes kind. Richard speaks highly of you. I glanced at my son, surprised. What exactly had he told this man about me? Andrew is William's pediatrician, Victoria explained, taking William from Richard's arms. And a dear family friend. He was at our wedding, though I'm not sure if you'd remember him. I remember everyone at your wedding, I said quietly. I had, after all, helped address many of the invitations, sitting at my kitchen table late into the night, my hand cramping as I wrote out name after name of people I'd never met. An awkward silence fell. James Crawford broke it, raising his glass. Well, now that everyone's here, shall we eat? Victoria and Catherine have prepared quite a feast. Victoria beamed. Mom did most of the work. She's been teaching me her recipes. Family traditions? You know. We moved to the table, set with fine china and crystal that I recognized as a wedding gift from one of Victoria's aunts. I was seated at the far end, opposite Victoria, with Dr. Peterson on my left and an empty chair on my right. Richard, Victoria called. Could you bring out the roast? It should be ready now. My son disappeared into the kitchen, returning moments later with a perfectly browned roast on a silver platter. The meal proceeded pleasantly enough on the surface. The food was excellent, though noticeably different from the simple, hearty meals I had raised Richard on. Dr. Peterson proved to be good company, asking thoughtful questions about my life and actually listening to the answers. Richard tells me you raised him on your own, he said as we enjoyed our main course. That could not have been easy. We managed, I replied, not wanting to delve into the hardships in this setting. Richard was a good boy, never gave me much trouble. Victoria laughed lightly. I find that hard to believe. He's stubborn as a mule now. He gets that from his father, I said, smiling at a memory. Martin could dig in his heels something fierce when he believed he was right. Mom, Richard interjected, did you know Andrew is launching a new pediatric wing at the hospital? Victoria's father is on the fundraising committee. The abrupt change of subject was jarring, but I took the hint. My reminiscences weren't welcome. The conversation shifted to hospital politics and charity galas, topics where I had nothing to contribute. I focused on my meal instead, noting how William, in a bassinet near Victoria's chair, had begun to fuss. He might be hungry, I suggested. During a lull in conversation, Victoria checked her watch. It's not time for his feeding yet. We're keeping him on a schedule. William's fussing increased, turning into full-blown wails. Victoria looked increasingly flustered. Perhaps he needs changing, Catherine offered. Victoria lifted William from his bassinet, her expression one of mild panic. I just changed him, before everyone arrived. May I? I asked, standing and reaching for my grandson. Victoria hesitated, then reluctantly handed him over. I cradled William against my shoulder, patting his back gently as I walked him around the dining room, humming softly. Within minutes, he produced a substantial burp, followed by a contented sigh. Gas. I explained, continuing to pat his back. Babies don't always follow schedules. I caught a flash of irritation in Victoria's eyes as she held out her arms. I'll take him now. I returned William, noting how he immediately began to fuss. Again. Victoria bounced him awkwardly, looking to her mother for help. I've got him, Catherine said, taking William and disappearing upstairs with him. The dinner resumed, though attention now hung in the air. When dessert time came, Victoria brought out the chocolate mousse cake from Bellini's, presenting it with a flourish. My cheesecake remained untouched on the sideboard. We should save Eleanor's cheesecake for another time, Victoria said, not quite meeting my eyes. This mousse cake won't keep as well. It was a flimsy excuse, but I said nothing as slices of the bakery cake were distributed. The conversation turned to summer plans, the Crawfords' vacation home in the Hamptons, a potential trip to Europe in the fall. Eleanor, James Crawford said suddenly, Richard tells me you're still working. At your age, shouldn't you be thinking about retirement? The question, innocuous on the surface, carried an undercurrent of judgment. I enjoy my work, I replied evenly. And Social Security doesn't go as far as it used to. Catherine returned, with a now sleeping William. He just needed his grandmother's touch, she said, emphasizing the word grandmother as she placed him back in the bassinet. The slight was deliberate, and judging by Richard's wince, not lost on him. I had been Eleanor all afternoon, while Catherine was unquestionably grandmother or grandma. Speaking of work, Victoria said brightly, we've been thinking of hiring a regular housekeeper. The house is just too much for me with William. Taking up so much time. Eleanor, you clean houses. Do you have any recommendations? The question hung in the air, stunning in its callousness. She wasn't asking me to clean their house. She was asking me to recommend someone else, making it clear that my profession was good enough for referrals but not for their home. I set down my fork carefully. Most of the women I know who clean houses are already working full schedules. People tend to hold on to good help. That's a shame, Victoria sighed. I was hoping for someone with your level of experience. Dr. Peterson cleared his throat. I must say, anyone who can raise a child alone while running their own business has my deepest respect. It takes remarkable strength and determination. It's not really a business, Victoria corrected. Eleanor works for a cleaning service, right? I have my own clients, I said, feeling a flush of heat rise to my face. I've been independent for 30 years. Mom built her client list from scratch, Richard added, surprising me with his defense. Some of her clients have been with her for decades. Victoria's smile tightened. How fascinating. Do you ever worry about, health issues? Cleaning all those houses at your age must be taxing. Victoria, Richard warned quietly. She blinked innocently. What? I'm concerned. Eleanor isn't getting any younger, and cleaning is such physical work. I had endured enough. Setting my napkin beside my plate, I stood slowly. Thank you for your concern, Victoria, but I'm perfectly capable of determining my own limitations. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to use the restroom. In the hallway, I leaned against the wall, drawing deep breaths to steady myself. Through the partially open door of Richard's home office, I glimpsed a familiar photo on his desk. Richard at his college graduation, me standing beside him, both of us beaming with pride. I stepped into the office, drawn to the image. It had been one of the happiest days of my life. Richard, the first in our family to graduate college, had just accepted a job offer at a prestigious firm. I had scraped together enough money to buy him a good suit for interviews, going without new work shoes for myself that year. The pride I'd felt watching him accept his diploma had made every sacrifice worthwhile. Beside that photo stood another. Richard and Victoria on their wedding day, surrounded by her large extended family. I was barely visible at the edge of the frame, my simple blue dress a stark contrast to the Crawfords' designer attire. A third photo showed William in the hospital, just hours old, cradled in Victoria's arms. Richard sat on the edge of the bed, and Catherine and James stood nearby, all gazing adoringly at the baby. I wasn't in the photo at all, because I hadn't been there, because no one had told me my grandson was being born. The realization hit me with physical force. This wasn't just about Victoria looking down on me, or the Crawfords treating me like an outsider. My own son had chosen to exclude me from one of the most important moments of his life. When I returned to the dining room, the conversation had moved on, but I couldn't focus on it. A decision was crystallizing in my mind, sharp and clear as a winter morning. I waited until there was a lull, then spoke. I should be going. The last bus to my neighborhood leaves soon. I forced a smile. Thank you for dinner. It was lovely. Richard frowned. You're leaving already? I can drive you home later. No need to trouble yourself, I said, gathering my purse and the untouched cheesecake. I'm used to the bus. At least, leave the cheesecake, Victoria suggested. We'll enjoy it tomorrow. The insincerity in her voice was the final straw. I think I'll take it to Mrs. Abernathy next door, I replied. She's been under the weather, and raspberry is her favorite. Victoria's face flushed. Richard, aren't you going to say anything? Your mother is being ridiculous. Richard looked. Between his wife and me, conflict evident in his expression. Mom, don't be like this. Just leave the cheesecake. Like what, exactly? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Like someone who deserves basic respect. Like your mother? You're overreacting, he said quietly. Victoria didn't mean anything by it. I looked at my son, truly looked at him, and saw a stranger. The boy I had raised, who had once stood up to playground bullies and defended classmates against injustice, now couldn't even stand up for his own mother. I understand perfectly well what Victoria meant, I said. What you all meant. And I've had. Enough, Dr. Peterson stood. If you're leaving, I can give you a ride. I'm headed in that direction anyway. That's very kind, but unnecessary, I replied, though I was touched by the gesture. I insist, he said, his eyes communicating something I couldn't quite interpret. It's no trouble. Too tired to argue, I nodded my acceptance. Victoria's expression darkened at this unexpected alliance. As we prepared to leave, Richard followed us to the door. Mom, don't go like this. We'll talk tomorrow, okay? I turned to face my son, suddenly aware that I had been making excuses for him for too long. There's nothing left to talk about, Richard. You've made your choice very clear. Outside, the evening air had turned cool. Dr. Peterson led me to his car, a modest sedan rather than the luxury vehicle I might have expected. Once we were settled, inside, he spoke quietly. I hope I didn't overstep. You seemed like you needed an escape route. Thank you, I said, genuine gratitude in my voice. It was kind of you. I should be honest, he said, starting the car. I've known Richard professionally for a while now. He speaks about you often, and always with great respect. I stared out, the window at my son's beautiful home, feeling a chasm opening between us that might never be bridged. The Richard I raised would never have sat silently while someone disrespected his mother. People change, Dr. Peterson said gently, especially when they're trying to fit into a world that isn't naturally theirs. His perception surprised me. You noticed that too? He nodded, navigating through the elegant neighborhood. Money changes. The dynamics of everything, especially relationships. Richard is caught between two worlds, the one you raised him in and the one Victoria represents. The truth of his words struck deep. As we drove toward my apartment building, I realized I had reached a crossroads. I could continue as I had been, swallowing insults and pretending they didn't wound me, or I could finally stand up for myself. By the time Dr. Peterson pulled up to my building, I had made my decision. It was time to show Richard, to show all of them, that I wouldn't allow myself to be treated as less than I was worth. Not anymore. "Thank you for the ride," I said, gathering my purse and the cheesecake. "And for the perspective." He handed me a card. "If you ever need anything, please call. Sometimes it helps to have someone to talk to who's outside the situation." I tucked the card into my pocket, nodding my thanks, then walked up the path to my apartment building. With each step, my resolve strengthened. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of something new, something entirely for myself. Morning light filtered through my bedroom curtains, illuminating dust motes that danced in the golden beams. I'd barely slept, my mind churning with thoughts and plans that had kept me awake well past midnight. But rather than feeling exhausted, I was filled with a strange, buzzing energy that pushed me out of bed before my alarm. I moved to the window and drew back the curtains, gazing out at the city slowly coming to life. My apartment building sat on a hill, providing a modest view of rooftops and, in the distance, the gleaming windows of downtown skyscrapers. Somewhere in that sprawl was Richard's office, where he worked as a corporate attorney, building a life that seemed increasingly separate from mine. The decision I'd made the night before still felt right in the clear light of day. I would take the trip I'd been dreaming of for years, a month-long journey to visit my younger sister Marlene in Arizona. She'd been asking me to come since she moved there 5 years ago, but there had always been a reason to postpone. Richard needed me, or I couldn't take time away from my clients, or there simply wasn't enough money. But now, looking out at the city that suddenly felt too constricting, I knew it was time. My first call was to Marlene, despite the early hour. She answered on the third ring, her voice groggy with sleep. "Ellie, is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," I assured her, though that wasn't entirely true. "Remember how you've been asking me to visit? Is that invitation still open?" Her voice immediately brightened. "Of course it is. You know you're welcome any time. But wait, are you actually saying yes after all this time?" I smiled at her surprise. "I am. In fact, I'm thinking of coming for a month. Is that too long?" "Too long? Ellie, you could move in permanently and I'd do cartwheels. When are you thinking of coming?" "How does next week sound?" There was a pause. "Next week? That's soon. Not that I'm complaining, it's just, this is very sudden. Did something happen?" I considered how to answer. Marlene knew about the tensions with Victoria, but I'd always downplayed them, not wanting to burden her with problems she couldn't solve from across the country. "Let's just say I've realized I've been putting my life on hold for too long," I said finally. "It's time for me to do something for myself." After finalizing plans with Marlene, I made my next round of calls to my clients. Over decades of cleaning homes, I'd built relationships with dozens of families, many of whom had come to depend on me. Arranging coverage for a month would be complicated, but not impossible. I had a network of women I sometimes exchanged clients with during illnesses or family emergencies. Mrs. Abernathy, my elderly neighbor and one of my oldest clients, answered her phone with characteristic briskness. "Eleanor, you're calling awfully early." "I'm sorry for the early call, Grace," I said. "I wanted to let you know I'll be away for a month starting next week. I've arranged for Luisa Rodriguez to cover for me while I'm gone. She's excellent. You'll be in good hands." "A month?" Mrs. Abernathy sounded genuinely dismayed. "Where on earth are you going for so long?" "Arizona. To visit my sister." "Well," she said after a moment, "it's about time you took a proper vacation. You've been cleaning my house every Tuesday for 15 years without missing a day, even when you had that terrible flu." "You made me chicken soup," I reminded her, smiling at the memory. "And you still insisted on cleaning the bathroom before you'd take it home." Stubborn woman. Her voice softened. "This wouldn't have anything to do with that daughter-in-law of yours, would it?" I hesitated. "It's complicated." "Humph. That girl never did appreciate what she got when Richard married into your family." Well, you go and enjoy yourself. Louisa can handle things here. By noon, I had contacted all my clients and arranged coverage. Most were surprised. I hadn't taken more than a long weekend off in years, but supportive. A few, like Mrs. Abernathy, seemed to understand that something significant had prompted my sudden decision. My next call should have been to Richard, but I found myself hesitating, my finger hovering over his name in my contacts. Instead, I set the phone down and turned, my attention to practical matters. I pulled out my suitcase, rarely used and still bearing tags from a department store long out of business, and began to assess what I would need for a month in the desert. As I sorted through my modest wardrobe, selecting lightweight clothes suitable for Arizona's heat, my phone rang. Richard's name flashed on the screen. I took a deep breath before answering. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice cautious. "About last night." "I'm going away for a while," I interrupted, not ready to rehash the dinner disaster. "I'm visiting Aunt Marlene in Arizona for a month." The silence that followed was so profound, I wondered if the call had dropped. Then, "A month? You can't be serious." "I'm perfectly serious. I've already booked my flight and arranged coverage for my clients." "Mom, you can't just... what about William? He needs his grandmother." The irony of his statement wasn't lost on me. "Does he? From what I've seen, Catherine has the grandmother role well covered." Richard's sigh was heavy with frustration. "That's not fair. You know Victoria's close to her mother. And she's made it abundantly clear that I don't measure up to Catherine's standards," I replied, keeping my voice even though my heart was racing. "Besides, you didn't seem concerned about William needing his grandmother when you failed to tell me he was being born." Another lengthy silence. "Who told you about that?" "No one had to tell me. I saw the hospital photos in your office. Everyone was there except me." "Why wasn't I informed, Richard?" His response came reluctantly. "Victoria was having a difficult time. She wanted to keep things calm." The implication wounded me deeply. And my presence would have somehow made things less calm? "Mom, that's not..." He broke off, then tried again. "Look, it was a mistake not to call you. I admit that. But running off to Arizona isn't the solution. Can't we sit down and talk about this like adults?" "I'm not running off, Richard. I'm taking a vacation, something most adults do regularly. The fact that you see it as some sort of dramatic gesture says more about how you view me than anything else." I could practically hear him struggling to find the right words. "What about your responsibilities here?" "My responsibilities?" I echoed, a note of disbelief creeping into my voice. "I've fulfilled my responsibilities to you for 32 years. I raised you alone, supported you through college, celebrated every milestone. I think I've earned a month to myself." "That's not what I meant," he backpedaled. "It's just... the timing is bad. Victoria's still adjusting to motherhood and I'm sure Catherine will continue to be an invaluable help," I finished for him. "Richard, my decision is made. I'm leaving next Tuesday." After we hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed, the phone still clutched in my hand. The conversation had gone much as I'd expected, yet it still left me feeling drained. Richard saw my decision as a reaction, a punishment, rather than what it truly was, an act of self-preservation. The doorbell rang, startling me from my thoughts. When I opened the door, I found Victoria standing in the hallway, William in a carrier at her feet. She looked uncharacteristically disheveled, her hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail, dark circles under her eyes. "Victoria," I said, genuinely surprised. "I wasn't expecting you." "Clearly," she replied, glancing at my half-packed suitcase visible through the bedroom doorway. "Richard told me about your plans." I stepped back, gesturing for her to enter. "Would you like some tea?" She shook her head, lifting William's carrier and bringing him inside. "I can't stay long. William has a doctor's appointment in an hour." I knelt to look at my grandson, who was awake and alert, his dark eyes tracking my movements. "He's grown," I said softly, reaching to stroke his cheek. To my surprise, Victoria didn't pull him away. "Babies do that," she said, attempting humor though it fell flat. "Eleanor, about last night." "It's all right," I said, straightening up. "We don't need to rehash it." "No, it's not all right," she insisted, setting William's carrier on the sofa. "The things I said, about your work, about your age, they were inappropriate. I apologize." Her apology, seemingly sincere, caught me off guard. "Thank you for saying that." Victoria nodded stiffly, then glanced around my apartment with new eyes, as if truly seeing it for the first time. Her gaze lingered on the small dining table where a framed photo of Richard as a boy stood beside a vase of grocery store daisies, then moved to the well-worn but clean sofa, the shelves lined with paperback mysteries, the kitchen with its outdated appliances but spotless countertops. "You've never been here before, have you?" I realized aloud. She shook her head. "No, we should have visited. That's on me." An awkward silence stretched between us. William made a small gurgling sound, drawing both our attention. "Richard says you're going to Arizona," Victoria said finally. "For a month." "Yes. To visit my sister." "Is this because of what happened at dinner?" "Because if it is, it's not just about dinner," I interrupted gently. "It's about a pattern that's been building for some time. I need some perspective, some distance." Victoria looked genuinely distressed. "I know I've been difficult since William was born. The hormones, the sleep deprivation, it's been challenging." "Motherhood often is," I acknowledged. "Richard says you raised him alone," she continued, surprising me again. "I can't imagine doing this without help. Even with my mother and the night nurse, I'm barely keeping it together." For the first time, I glimpsed vulnerability beneath Victoria's polished exterior. She wasn't just Richard's privileged wife or Catherine's entitled daughter. She was a new mother struggling with the overwhelming responsibilities that came with that role. "The early months are the hardest," I offered. "It does get easier." She nodded, then straightened her shoulders. "Well, I should get to the point. Richard is upset about your trip. He thinks you're abandoning your family right when we need you most." The fragile moment of connection evaporated. "I see. And you came here to convince me to stay?" "Actually, no," Victoria said, looking slightly uncomfortable. "I came to ask if you'd be willing to help before you go. My mother has to return home. Next week, my father's having minor surgery, and I'm terrified of being alone with William all day." The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. After months of being made to feel unwelcome in their home, I was suddenly needed. "What exactly are you asking, Victoria?" She took a deep breath. "I'm asking if you would consider staying with us for a few days before your trip, to help with William, to teach me some of what you know about babies." The request was so unexpected that for a moment I couldn't formulate a response. Victoria, proud, confident Victoria, was asking for my help, my expertise, my knowledge as a mother. "I understand if you say no," she added quickly, misinterpreting my silence. "After how I've treated you, I wouldn't blame you." I looked at William, peacefully observing the world from his carrier, then back at Victoria. Despite everything, she was my grandson's mother, and she was asking for help not for herself, but for him. "I'll come for 3 days," I said finally. "Tuesday through Thursday. My flight leaves Friday morning." Relief flooded Victoria's face. "Thank you. I appreciate it." As she prepared to leave, William began to fuss. Victoria immediately looked panicked, fumbling with the diaper bag. "May I?" I asked, gesturing toward my grandson. She nodded, and I lifted William from his carrier, cradling him against my shoulder the way I had at the baptism. His little body was warm and solid, his baby scent bringing back a rush of memories from when Richard was this small. "You need to burp more often than you think," I told Victoria, demonstrating the gentle pat and rub motion that had always worked for Richard. "And he likes to be held upright, see? He can observe more that way." Victoria watched intently, then tentatively reached for her son. I transferred William to her arms, guiding her hands into the proper position. "Support his head, but don't be afraid of him. Babies sense fear." She adjusted her hold, and William settled against her, his fussing subsiding. A look of wonder crossed Victoria's face. "He's calm. He's actually calm." "You're his mother," I said simply. "He knows your heartbeat better than anyone's." As they left, Victoria turned back briefly. "Eleanor, thank you. And I am sorry for everything." I nodded, accepting her words for what they were. A beginning, not a resolution. The hurt and disappointment of the past months couldn't be erased with one apology or one request for help. But it was a start. After they were gone, I returned to my packing with renewed purpose. The trip to Arizona wasn't an escape. It was a necessary step toward reclaiming myself. I would help Victoria and William for 3 days, sharing what I knew about motherhood with a woman who had never shown interest in learning from me before. Then I would board a plane and begin my own adventure, not running away from my problems, but running toward the woman I had set aside for too long in service to others. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard. "Mom, please reconsider this trip. We need you here." I typed my response carefully. "I'll be there Tuesday through Thursday to help Victoria with William. On Friday, I'm getting on that plane. I've earned this time for myself, Richard. It's not negotiable." His reply came quickly. "I don't understand why you're doing this." I looked around my small apartment, the home I had made for myself after raising my son, the place where I had learned to be alone but not lonely. Soon I would see landscapes I'd only viewed in Marlene's photos, feel the dry heat of the desert on my skin, experience the vast openness of a sky unobstructed by city buildings. The thought filled me with an anticipation I hadn't felt in years. "You don't need to understand," I texted back. "You just need to respect my decision." I set the phone down and returned to my suitcase, folding in a light sweater for cool desert evenings. For the first time in decades, I was putting myself first, and it felt like coming home to a self I had almost forgotten existed. Arizona embraced me with heat that wrapped around my body like a heavy blanket the moment I stepped off the plane. After the perpetual dampness of my coastal hometown, the dry air felt almost cleansing, as if it could scour away the hurt and disappointment I'd carried with me across the country. Marlene waited at the arrivals gate, her silver hair cropped, short, her smile wide and welcoming. She looked more like our mother than ever, though she'd always resisted the comparison when we were younger. "Ellie!" she called, waving frantically as if I might miss her among the sparse weekday afternoon crowd. We embraced tightly, both of us a little teary-eyed. 5 years was too long to go without seeing your only sister. "Look at you," she said, holding me at arm's length for inspection. "You've lost weight." "Just a few pounds," I replied, though the truth was closer to 15. The stress of recent months had whittled away at my appetite. Marlene lived in a modest stucco house on the outskirts of Tucson, where the desert began in earnest. As we drove from the airport, I found myself mesmerized by the landscape. The rugged mountains in the distance, their peaks tinged purple in the late afternoon light. The stately saguaro cacti standing like sentinels across the desert floor. The vast, unobstructed sky stretching infinitely in all directions. "It's beautiful," I murmured, rolling down the window to feel the warm wind against my face. Marlene smiled. "I knew you'd love it. It's different from anything back home, isn't it? Gives you perspective." Perspective was exactly what I needed. The 3 days I'd spent at Richard and Victoria's house before my departure had been an exercise in restraint. I'd shown Victoria how to bathe William properly, how to soothe his colic with gentle pressure on his tummy, how to interpret his different cries. I'd prepared meals, done laundry, tidied the house, all the things I'd done countless times as a mother, now performed under the watchful eye of my daughter-in-law. Victoria had been surprisingly receptive, watching attentively as I demonstrated baby care techniques, taking notes in a leather-bound journal, even asking questions about Richard's infancy. But an undercurrent of tension remained, especially when Richard was present. He'd been cool toward me, clearly still upset about my impending trip, though he softened when he saw how much his wife was learning from me. On my last night there, as I prepared to leave, Victoria had hugged me awkwardly. "Thank you," she'd said, her voice low. "I feel more confident now." "You'll be fine," I'd assured her. "Trust your instincts, and call if you need advice." Richard had driven me to the airport in silence, helping with my suitcase but keeping his thoughts to himself until the last moment. As I prepared to go through security, he'd finally spoken. "I still think this is a mistake," he'd said. "A month is too long." "It's too long for whom?" I'd asked. "For William, who's surrounded by people who adore him? For Victoria, who has resources and support? Or for you, who's never had to manage without me nearby?" He'd looked stricken, confirming my suspicion. Despite his successful career and seemingly perfect life, my son still relied on knowing I was just a phone call away, ready to solve any problem, smooth any rough edge. "I'll be back in a month," I'd said more gently. "And when I return, we're going to have a real conversation about boundaries and respect." Now, as Marlene turned onto a dirt road leading to her home, those tense goodbyes seemed very far away. This was what I needed: distance, both physical and emotional, from the dynamics that had been slowly suffocating me. Marlene's house was small but welcoming, with a covered porch that wrapped around two sides and provided shade from the relentless sun. Inside was cool and airy, with terracotta tile floors, white walls adorned with local artwork, and large windows that framed the desert landscape like living paintings. "Your room's through here," Marlene said, leading me down a short hallway. "It's not fancy, but the view is spectacular at sunrise." The guest room was painted a soft sage green, with a handmade quilt in shades of rust and turquoise covering the queen-sized bed. A small desk sat beneath a window that looked out on a garden filled with desert plants: ocotillo with its slender whip-like branches, barrel cacti with their round forms, and flowering prickly pear. Beyond the garden stretched the desert, vast and ancient. "It's perfect," I said, setting my suitcase at the foot of the bed. "I can't believe I waited so long to visit." Marlene leaned against the doorframe. "Better late than never." "And from what you've told me, you're here at exactly the right time." That first evening, we sat on the porch watching the sunset transform the sky from blue to orange to deep purple, sipping glasses of white wine and catching up on 5 years of life lived apart. Marlene had retired from teaching 2 years earlier, and now volunteered at a wildlife rehabilitation center. She'd dated briefly but was happily single, filling her days with hiking, painting, and a close circle of friends. "What about you?" she asked as darkness settled around us. "What do you want from this month, Ellie, besides escaping your daughter-in-law?" I considered the question, watching a shooting star trace a brief, bright arc across the night sky. "I think I want to remember who I am apart from being Richard's mother or Victoria's inconvenient mother-in-law. I've spent so long defining myself by my roles that I'm not sure what's left when you take them away." Marlene reached over and squeezed my hand. "Well, that sounds like an excellent project for the next 30 days. The first week passed in a blur of new experiences. Marlene took me hiking in the foothills of the Santa Catalina Mountains, introduced me to her friends at a pottery class, brought me to the wildlife center where I helped feed baby hummingbirds with tiny syringes of sugar water. My days filled with sunshine and activity, my nights with deep, dreamless sleep. Richard called twice that first week, his voice strained and distant. William had a diaper rash. Victoria was struggling with the feeding schedule. The night nurse had quit unexpectedly. Have you considered that these might be normal challenges that every new parent faces? I asked during our second call. Ones that you and Victoria are fully capable of handling yourselves? His silence spoke volumes. After a moment, he changed the subject. Mom, when are you coming home? Exactly? I need to know. I gazed out at the desert from Marlene's porch, feeling the evening warmth radiating from the earth. My return ticket is for May 12th. That's 3 more weeks, Richard. 3 weeks, he repeated, as if I'd said 3 years. That's so long. It's the blink of an eye, I corrected gently. And it's what I need right now. The following day, Marlene introduced me to her neighbor, Joseph Whitefeather, a Tohono O'odham elder who taught desert ecology at the community college. He offered to take us on a guided walk to learn about desert plants and their traditional uses. Joseph moved through the desert with the ease of someone born to its rhythms, pointing out plants I would have overlooked, explaining how each had sustained his people for generations. He showed us how to harvest prickly pear fruit, demonstrated how to extract the liquid from barrel cactus in emergencies, identified edible seeds and medicinal leaves. The desert only seems empty to those who don't know how to look, he said, his voice deep and melodic. But for those who understand, it offers everything needed for survival. Something about his words resonated deeply with me. I too had been surviving in an environment that others might consider harsh, finding nourishment where I could, adapting to difficult conditions. But was mere survival enough? That night, I called Grace Abernathy. After pleasantries about the weather and her cat's recent veterinary adventure, I broached the subject that had been forming in my mind since the desert walk. Grace, do you remember when you suggested I should start my own business? Not just cleaning houses, but something more? Of course I do, she replied. I've been telling you for years that you have a gift for organization. Those filing systems you set up for me have saved my sanity. I've been thinking about it, I said, surprising myself with the admission. About offering organizing services, helping people declutter their homes and lives. It would be less physically demanding than house cleaning, and I could set my own hours, charge more. Eleanor Sullivan, Grace said, her voice warm with approval. Are you finally considering a career change at 67? Is that crazy? I asked. It's brilliant, she countered, and long overdue. The seed that had been planted began to grow. I spent the next few days researching on Marlene's computer, reading about professional organizing, watching videos of transformed spaces, making notes on potential services and pricing. The idea energized me in a way I hadn't experienced in years. When Victoria called midway through my second week, I was knee-deep in business plan research. Her voice on the phone was hesitant, almost timid, so unlike her usual confident tone, that I immediately feared something was wrong with William. Is the baby all right? I asked, setting aside my notebook. William's fine, she assured me quickly. He's napping now, actually. I just wanted to talk to you, if that's okay. The request was so unexpected that for a moment I couldn't respond. Victoria and I had never had a conversation that wasn't centered around Richard or William. Of course, I said finally. What's on your mind? There was a pause. Then, I miss having you here. The house feels, I don't know, empty somehow. You have William and Richard, I pointed out, trying to make sense of this sudden outreach. It's not the same, she said. Richard's working late most nights, and William, well, he's wonderful, but not much of a conversationalist yet. She attempted a laugh that sounded more like a suppressed sob. The truth is, I'm lonely, and I miss your help. Those 3 days before you left, I learned more from you than from all the baby books and pediatrician visits combined. I sat down on the edge of Marlene's sofa, absorbing Victoria's words. I thought you didn't approve of my methods. You seemed so concerned about schedules and techniques. I was trying to prove I knew what I was doing, she admitted. My mother raised us with nannies. She never changed a diaper or got up for midnight. Feedings. I didn't want to be that kind of mother, but I had no idea how to be different. The confession stunned me. All this time, I'd assumed Victoria's cool demeanor and insistence on doing things her way stemmed from disapproval of me and my background. It had never occurred to me that she might be insecure, might be struggling to define motherhood for herself in opposition to the example she'd been given. You don't have to be like Catherine, I said carefully. You can be your own kind of mother, to William. I don't know how, she whispered, and I heard the genuine fear in her voice. I'm afraid I'll mess it up. Every mother feels that way, I told her. Even the ones who look like they have it all together. Did you feel that way? I smiled, remembering the overwhelming terror and joy of those early days with Richard. Every single day, but you find your way. And Victoria, you can always ask for help. That's not weakness. It's wisdom. Our conversation continued for nearly an hour, the longest we'd ever spoken without tension or interruption. By the end, something had shifted between us. A tentative bridge forming across the chasm of misunderstanding that had separated us for so long. As I hung up, Marlene appeared in the doorway, eyebrows raised in question. That was Victoria, I explained, still processing the unexpected turn of events. She called to say she misses me. Marlene smiled. Well, isn't that interesting? Sounds like absence really does make the heart grow fonder, or at least more appreciative. The following morning, Joseph invited us to join a sunrise ceremony in the desert. We rose before dawn, bundling in light jackets against the pre-dawn chill, and followed him to a small clearing where several members of his community had gathered. They welcomed us warmly, incorporating us into their circle as Joseph led a blessing to greet the new day. As the first rays of sunlight crested the mountains, painting the desert in shades of gold and rose, I felt a profound sense of connection to the earth beneath my feet, to the community surrounding me, and to some deeper part of myself that had been dormant for too long. Every sunrise is a new beginning, Joseph said as we walked back toward home, the desert coming alive around us. A chance to decide who you want to be today. His words settled into my heart, crystallizing the transformation that had been gradually occurring since my arrival. Arizona hadn't just been an escape. It had become a cocoon where I was slowly becoming someone new, or perhaps, more accurately, rediscovering someone I had always been beneath the layers of obligation and compromise. That afternoon, I created a logo for my new business, New Beginnings Organizing Services. Marlene, who had been secretly taking graphic design classes at the community center, helped me refine it and create a simple website. When Grace called to check on me, I shared my progress, and she immediately offered to be my first client and to spread the word among her friends. You should also do consultations for seniors downsizing to smaller homes, she suggested. There's a huge need for compassionate help with that process. The idea resonated with me immediately. I'd helped several elderly clients over the years sort through belongings when they moved to retirement communities, approaching the emotional task with patience and understanding they couldn't get from family members too close to the situation. By the time my third week in Arizona began, I had the outline of a viable business plan, a growing list of potential clients thanks to Grace's networking, and a renewed sense of purpose that went beyond being Richard's mother or William's grandmother. Wing was becoming Eleanor Sullivan entrepreneur, and the woman emerging from this desert cocoon was stronger, more confident, and more clear-eyed than the one who had arrived just weeks before. The transformation wasn't just internal. My skin had taken on a golden hue from days spent in the Arizona sunshine. The tension that had perpetually knotted my shoulders had eased, thanks to regular hikes and Marlene's insistence that I join her for yoga classes. I'd even let my hair, which I'd kept in the same practical bob for decades, grow a little longer, softening the frame around my face. "You look younger," Marlene observed as we prepared dinner one evening. "Happier," I smiled, chopping bell peppers for the fajitas we were making. "I feel younger, like I've shed a skin I'd outgrown." "Are you nervous about going back?" she asked, the question I'd been avoiding even in my own thoughts. I set down the knife, considering. "Not nervous exactly, but I know things will be different." "I'm different," Marlene nodded. "That's the point of journeys, isn't it? You never return quite the same person who left." That night, I called Richard for our weekly check-in. He sounded tired but less frantic than in previous calls. "William slept through the night for the first time," he reported, a note of wonder in his voice. "Victoria says it's because we've been following the bedtime routine you showed her." "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely pleased for them. "How are you managing otherwise?" He hesitated. "It's been educational. I didn't realize how much you did for us, even before William was born. How much I took for granted." His admission, like Victoria's earlier, caught me by surprise. "We all take things for granted sometimes," I said. "The important thing is recognizing it before it's too late to make changes." "When you come home," he began, then corrected himself. "If you come home, will things be different?" The if rather than when revealed how much my absence had shaken his assumptions about our relationship. Good, I thought. That awareness was necessary for any real change. "Yes," I said simply. "Things will be different. They need to be." After we hung up, I stepped outside onto Marlene's porch, gazing up at a sky ablaze with stars impossible to see from my city apartment. A month ago, the prospect of redefining my relationship with Richard would have terrified me. Now, it felt not just possible but essential for both of us. In the desert night, surrounded by the gentle chorus of insects and the distant call of a coyote, I made a promise to myself. I would return home, but on my own terms. The invisible woman was gone, replaced by someone who had remembered her own value, someone who was ready to be seen. The familiar weight of coastal humidity wrapped around me as I stepped off the plane, a stark contrast to the dry heat I'd grown accustomed to in Arizona. 1 month away had transformed the ordinary terminal of my hometown airport into something almost foreign. The crowds seemed louder, the fluorescent lights harsher, the pace more frantic than I remembered. I paused at the base of the escalator, scanning the arrivals area for Richard, who had insisted on picking me up despite my protests that I could easily take a taxi. When I spotted him, I nearly didn't recognize my own son. He looked different somehow. His normally impeccable appearance slightly rumpled, a shadow of stubble on his jaw, dark circles under his eyes hinting at sleepless nights. "Mom," he called, raising his hand in greeting. As I approached, he hesitated, briefly before pulling me into an awkward hug. "Welcome home. You look different." I smiled, knowing exactly what he meant. My skin had bronzed under the Arizona sun, my silver hair now styled in loose waves rather than my usual practical bob, and I'd exchanged my sensible slacks and blouses for a flowing dress in vibrant turquoise, a parting gift from Marlene. "A good different, I hope," I replied. He nodded, taking my suitcase. "Good, yes. Just not what I expected." The drive from the airport to my apartment was filled with small talk. Updates on William's newest achievements, tidbits about Richard's current cases, questions about my flight. Neither of us seemed ready to broach the deeper issues that hung between us, the conversation we'd both been postponing. As we pulled up to my apartment building, Richard cleared his throat. "Victoria was hoping you might come for dinner tonight, to welcome you back." I considered the invitation, weighing my desire to see William against my need for space after the journey. Not tonight, I decided. I need to unpack and settle in. How about tomorrow evening instead? A flicker of disappointment crossed his face, but he nodded. Tomorrow works. I'll let Victoria know. He helped carry my luggage upstairs, lingering awkwardly in my doorway as if unsure whether to leave or stay. My apartment felt smaller than I remembered, the ceilings lower, the walls closer together. Or perhaps I had simply expanded beyond its confines during my time away. "Mom," Richard began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "I've been thinking a lot while you were gone, about how things have been between us, between you and Victoria." I set my handbag on the kitchen counter, giving him my full attention. "And?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture reminiscent of his teenage years when he'd struggled to express difficult emotions. "I should have stood up for you. At the baptism, at that dinner, all those times. I was wrong not to." The admission, delivered with genuine remorse, was something I had longed to hear for months. Yet now that the words hung in the air between us, I realized they weren't enough on their own. "Yes, you should have," I agreed, keeping my voice gentle but firm. "But Richard, the problem goes deeper than that. You've allowed your relationship with me to be defined by Victoria's preferences, by the Crawfords' expectations, by this new life you're building. I understand wanting to prioritize your wife and son, that's natural and right. But it shouldn't come at the expense of treating me with basic respect and consideration." Richard winced but didn't argue. "I know, and I'm sorry, truly sorry." He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "When you left, it was like suddenly seeing clearly for the first time in years. Victoria and I had to figure everything out without you as a safety net. It was hard, but also illuminating." I moved to the window, gazing out at the familiar view of city rooftops. "I'm glad to hear that. But Richard, I need you to understand something important. I won't go back to how things were. I can't be the invisible support system anymore. Always available, never acknowledged. I don't want that either," he said quickly. "You deserve better. We all do." He hesitated, then added, "Victoria's changed too, you know. While you were gone, she's softer somehow, more vulnerable." I thought of our unexpected phone conversation, the loneliness she'd confessed, the insecurity beneath her polished exterior. "Motherhood changes you," I said simply. "Sometimes in ways you never anticipated." After Richard left, I spent the evening reacquainting myself with my apartment, unpacking my suitcase, and sorting through a month's worth of mail. Among the bills and advertisements lay an elegant cream-colored envelope, an invitation to William's christening celebration, scheduled for the coming Sunday at the Crawfords Country Club. The formal script included my name with the designation Grandmother of the Guest of Honor, a small but significant acknowledgement. The following evening, I took extra care with my appearance before heading to Richard and Victoria's. I wore a new dress purchased in Tucson, a simple cut in soft lavender that complemented my tanned skin, and added a silver and turquoise pendant Marlene had insisted I accept as a keepsake of my desert transformation. Victoria answered the door, with William in her arms, her face lighting up with genuine pleasure. "Eleanor, you look wonderful. Arizona clearly agreed with you." "Thank you," I said, stepping inside. "May I?" I held out my arms for William, who had grown noticeably in the month I'd been away. His chubby cheeks had filled out, and he regarded me with curious eyes that now tracked movement with focused attention. Victoria transferred him to my arms without hesitation. "He's missed you," she said, surprising me. "I've been showing him your picture and telling him stories about his grandma in Arizona." The simple word, grandma, spoken so naturally, sent a wave of emotion through me. It was the first time Victoria had referred to me that way, acknowledging my rightful place in William's life. Dinner was a revelation. The dining room had been transformed since my last visit, the formal place settings replaced with casual tableware, fresh wildflowers in a simple vase, and a high chair pulled up to the table where William could join us. "I hope you don't mind." "A less formal meal," Victoria said as she served a homemade lasagna. "We've simplified things a bit since we had to manage on our own." The lasagna was slightly overcooked, the salad dressing clearly store-bought rather than the gourmet vinaigrette Catherine would have prepared. But the imperfection felt honest, even refreshing, after months of meals where appearance mattered more than substance. "It's delicious," I said sincerely, noting how Victoria's face brightened at the praise. As we ate, Victoria shared stories of their month without me. The night William refused to sleep unless held upright, which Richard managed by sleeping in, the recliner with the baby on his chest. The first time Victoria successfully gave William a bath alone, the disastrous attempt at making homemade baby food that ended with pureed carrots on the ceiling. "I never realized how much work it truly is," she admitted, glancing at Richard with newfound respect. "How did you do it alone, Eleanor? With no help?" The question, asked with genuine curiosity rather than judgment, opened a door I'd thought permanently closed. For the first time, I shared stories of raising Richard as a young widow. The challenges and joys, the mistakes and triumphs, the bone-deep exhaustion and transcendent moments of connection. Victoria listened attentively, occasionally glancing at William with an expression that suggested she was seeing her own journey as a mother in a new light. Richard, too, seemed to be hearing these stories with fresh ears, perhaps understanding for the first time the magnitude of what I had done for him. After dinner, as Victoria put William down for the night, Richard and I stepped onto the back patio, where the evening air carried the scent of blooming jasmine. "I've never heard you talk about those years that way before," he said quietly. "About how hard it was after Dad died." I sat in one of the patio chairs, gazing up at the emerging stars, far fewer here than in the desert sky. "You were young. I didn't want to burden you with adult worries. And later, when I was grown?" I considered the question. I suppose I thought it didn't matter anymore. The struggles were behind us, and you had your own life to build. I paused, then added honestly, "And perhaps I didn't think you'd be interested. You seemed so eager to move beyond our humble beginnings." Richard winced. "I've been ashamed of where we came from," he admitted. "Of the apartment we lived in, the second-hand clothes, the fact that my mother cleaned houses for a living. I wanted to be more like the Crawfords, sophisticated, educated, wealthy. And now?" I asked. He looked at me directly, his eyes reflecting the genuine remorse I'd glimpsed earlier. "Now I'm ashamed of being ashamed. You worked yourself to the bone to give me opportunities you never had. You put me through college on a housekeeper's salary. Everything I have, this house, my career, even Victoria and William, exists because of the foundation you built." The acknowledgement, so long in coming, washed over me like a healing balm. "Thank you for seeing that," I said softly. "It means more than you know." Victoria joined us carrying a baby monitor. "He went down without a fuss," she reported, settling into the chair beside me. "Eleanor, I owe you an apology. Many apologies, actually. The way I treated you, especially at the baptism and that awful dinner, it was inexcusable." "May I ask why?" I said, the question I'd held back for months finally finding voice. "Why did my profession, my background seem so threatening to you?" Victoria looked down at her hands, her usual confidence momentarily absent. "It wasn't about you, not really. It was about me, my insecurities. I grew up with certain expectations. About success, about the kind of people we associated with. My mother always taught me that appearance matters above all else." She glanced up, meeting my eyes directly. "But this past month has taught me that what truly matters is substance. Kindness, wisdom, the things you've always had in abundance. Her words, seemingly sincere, reminded me of something Joseph had said during one of our desert walks. True respect isn't demanded or forced. It's earned through actions, through living with integrity even when no one is watching. I appreciate your apology, I said carefully. But Victoria, Richard, what I need most isn't words. It's changed behavior moving forward. Consistent respect, not just when you need my help. They both nodded, exchanging a glance that suggested this was a conversation they'd already had between themselves. We want to do better, Richard said. And we want William to know his grandmother, to really know you, not just the sanitized version Victoria and I tried to present. As if to emphasize the point, Victoria reached for something beside her chair, a gift bag I hadn't noticed earlier. We got you something, to welcome you home. The bag contained a framed photograph of William, professionally taken during my absence with space beside it for additional photos. We thought you might want to display it in your new office, Victoria explained. My new office? I echoed, puzzled. Richard smiled. We heard from Grace Abernathy about your business plans. She's quite the champion for New Beginnings organizing services. I laughed, not entirely surprised that Grace had spread the word. It's still just an idea at this point. Actually, Victoria interjected, it's more than that. We took the liberty of mentioning your services to some friends. There's already a waiting list of potential clients eager to hire you. People downsizing, organizing home offices, decluttering before renovations. The revelation stunned me. During my absence, not only had Richard and Victoria been forced to manage without me, but they'd apparently embraced my new direction and actively supported it. That's unexpected, I managed. Consider it the first step in making amends, Richard said. And there's something else. We'd like you to consider moving into the garden apartment. The garden apartment, a self-contained studio at the back of their property that they'd been using for storage, had been renovated years ago but never properly utilized. It offered privacy and independence while keeping me close to William. We're not asking you to be our live-in babysitter, Victoria clarified quickly, correctly reading my hesitation. The apartment would be yours, to use as you see fit. Your home, your rules. But it would mean William could see you more often, and frankly, she glanced at Richard before continuing. We would love to have you closer. The offer was tempting, but I was wary of slipping back into old patterns. I appreciate the gesture, but I need to think about it. This past month has shown me the value of independence, of building my own life separate from my role as mother and grandmother. Richard nodded, seeming to understand. The offer stands, whenever or if ever you're ready. No pressure, no expectations. That night, back in my apartment, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, reflecting on the day's revelations. The changes in Richard and Victoria seemed genuine, if nascent. The support for my business venture was unexpected but welcome. And the invitation to the garden apartment represented a potential new chapter in our relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than obligation. My phone chimed with a message from Marlene. How was the homecoming? Desert withdrawal setting. In yet? I smiled, typing back. Better than expected. They're trying. And yes, I miss the stars already. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright. Perfect weather for William's christening celebration. I chose a simple but elegant dress in a deep blue that Marlene had insisted suited me perfectly, paired with comfortable but stylish shoes, a far cry from the practical, unassuming outfits I would have selected in the past. The country club was predictably grand, with manicured lawns stretching toward the ocean and staff in crisp uniforms attending to the guests' every need. The Crawfords had spared no expense, with white roses and blue hydrangeas adorning every table, a string quartet playing softly in the background, and champagne flowing freely. I spotted Catherine immediately, holding court among her friends, resplendent in a designer suit that probably cost more than 3 months of my income. When she saw me, her expression flickered with surprise, her eyes taking in my transformed appearance. "Eleanor," she said as I approached, her voice betraying a note of uncertainty. "You look, well, quite well, actually." "Thank you, Catherine," I replied evenly. Arizona was exactly what I needed. Before she could respond, Victoria appeared. At my side, William in her arms, dressed in a christening gown that had belonged to Richard. "Eleanor, there you are. We've been looking for you. The photographer wants family photos before the ceremony." Family photos. The simple inclusion nearly brought tears to my eyes. Victoria led me to where Richard waited near a flowering arbor, the photographer arranging everyone in position. To my surprise, I was placed in the center of the group, with Richard and Victoria on either side of me, William in my arms. "The 3 generations," the photographer explained, adjusting our positions slightly. "Grandmother, parents, and child. Perfect." As the camera clicked, capturing the moment, I felt Catherine's gaze upon us from across the lawn. There was something in her expression. Not quite envy, not quite admiration, but perhaps a dawning recognition that her carefully maintained social hierarchy had been disrupted. Later, as guests mingled over brunch, Dr. Peterson approached, his smile warm and genuine. "Ms. Sullivan, you're positively glowing. Vacation agreed with you, I see." "A journey of rediscovery," I corrected gently. "And please, call me Eleanor." He nodded, glancing around at the elegant gathering. "Things seem different today. The dynamic has shifted." "Perspective changes everything," I agreed. "Sometimes, you have to step away to see clearly what needs to change." As if to illustrate the point, Richard clinked his glass, calling for the guests' attention. He stood tall, one arm around Victoria's waist, looking every inch the proud father and husband. "Thank you all for joining us to celebrate William's christening," he began. "Before we proceed with the ceremony, I'd like to say a few words about family." His gaze found mine across the crowd. "When William was born, I thought I understood what it meant to be a parent. But it wasn't until recently that I truly began to appreciate the sacrifices, the unconditional love, the quiet strength it takes to raise a child." He paused, his expression solemn. "My mother, Eleanor Sullivan, raised me alone after my father died when I was 12. She worked multiple jobs, often cleaning other people's homes, to ensure I had every opportunity she never had. She taught me the value of hard work, integrity, and perseverance. Everything I am today, I owe to her example." A hush fell over the gathering, many guests shifting uncomfortably at this unexpected departure from the usual polite platitudes. Catherine's face had frozen in a tight smile, while James looked vaguely embarrassed. "Today isn't just about welcoming William into our faith community," Richard continued. "It's about honoring the legacy of family that makes us who we are. All parts of that legacy, not just the ones that look good in photographs or sound impressive in conversation." Victoria stepped forward, taking Richard's hand. "William is blessed, with 2 grandmothers who love him deeply, each bringing different gifts to his life. We hope he'll grow up valuing substance over appearance, kindness over status, and the kind of quiet courage it takes to stand up for oneself even when it's difficult." Their words, spoken publicly before friends and family, were more meaningful than any private apology could have been. They were acknowledging not just me, but the values I had tried to instill in Richard, the principles I had lived by even when they came at great personal cost. After the ceremony, as guests began to depart, Catherine approached me, her expression unreadable. "That was quite the speech Richard gave," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "Yes, it was," I agreed, offering nothing more. She seemed to struggle internally before speaking again. "I may have misjudged you, Eleanor. Victoria speaks highly of your help with William. She says you have a natural way with him. Coming from Catherine, this was tantamount to a full apology. I nodded, accepting the olive branch for what it was. William is a joy. I'm looking forward to watching him grow. As I prepared to leave the celebration, Victoria caught up with me near the entrance, William sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Before you go," she said, somewhat hesitantly, "I wanted to ask, would you be willing to teach me how to make that bread? The one from the baptism?" William should grow up knowing his grandmother's family recipes. The request, simple yet profound, represented everything I had hoped for, not erasing our differences or pretending the hurt had never happened, but building something new on a foundation of genuine respect and shared love for William. "I'd like that," I said. "Perhaps next weekend, after my first client appointment for New Beginnings." Victoria smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "It's a date." As I walked to my car, I thought about the invisible woman who had stood silently in a church kitchen watching her bread being discarded. She was gone now, replaced by someone who had reclaimed her voice, her dignity, her sense of self-worth. The journey hadn't been easy, and the path forward would require continued vigilance to maintain the new boundaries I had established. But looking back at the country club, where my son and his family were saying their goodbyes to the last remaining, guess I felt something I hadn't experienced in a very long time. Hope. Not just for my relationship with them, but for my own future. A future where I was neither defined solely by my role as mother and grandmother, nor diminished because of my background or profession. I was Eleanor Sullivan, organizer, entrepreneur, desert wanderer, wisdom carrier. I was visible at last, to others, and most importantly, to myself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.